Welcome to our Scary Stories, the podcast where we bring you the spookiest, most bone-chilling tales of the supernatural. In today's episode titled Whispers from the Shadows, we'll be exploring 3 different locations that are said to be haunted by the restless spirits of the dead. Join us as we delve into the world of the unknown and uncover the secrets that lie hidden in the darkness. Our first story of the night is titled The Curse of Ravenwood Manor. Emily and Thomas arrived at Ravenwood Manor on a dark and stormy night. The old mansion loomed before them, its windows boarded up and its walls covered in ivy. As they approached the front door, the wind howled and the trees rustled, creating an eerie atmosphere. Emily shivered and pulled her coat tighter around her. "Are you sure you want to do this?" Thomas asked, his voice barely audible over the sound of the storm. Emily nodded resolutely. "I inherited this house from my grandmother. It's time to face my past." They pushed open the heavy door, which creaked loudly in protest. The foyer was grand and imposing, with a sweeping staircase leading up to the second floor. Emily and Thomas exchanged nervous glances as they stepped inside. The interior was dark and musty, with cobwebs hanging from the ceiling and dust covering every surface. They explored the rooms one by one, their footsteps echoing through the empty halls. As they entered the living room, Emily saw a figure out of the corner of her eye. She turned quickly, but there was no one there. "Did you see that?" she asked Thomas. "See what?" he replied, looking around confused. Emily shrugged it off and continued exploring the manor. But strange things kept happening. Objects moved on their own, doors slammed shut, and they heard eerie whispers in the darkness. Emily and Thomas tried to rationalize it, but they couldn't deny that something was off about Ravenwood Manor. The next day, they met Mrs. Johnson, the old caretaker of the manor. She warned them about the curse that haunts Ravenwood Manor. "Many years ago, Lady Ravenwood lived in this manor with her family," Mrs. Johnson explained. "But your ancestors stole her land and caused her family to fall into ruin. She seeks revenge against your family to this day." Emily and Thomas dismissed Mrs. Johnson's warnings as superstition, but the seed of doubt had been planted in their minds. As they continued exploring the manor, they found a locked room that Emily's grandmother had always kept shut. Emily felt drawn to the room and begged Thomas to help her break the lock. They eventually succeeded and found a diary that belonged to Lady Ravenwood. As Emily and Thomas delved deeper into Lady Ravenwood's diary, they learned the gruesome truth about her past. Her family had owned vast lands in Ravenwood, but Emily's ancestors had coveted their property and conspired to steal it. They forged documents, manipulated the legal system, and even resorted to violence to take over Lady Ravenwood's land. As a result, Lady Ravenwood's family was left destitute and homeless. But that was not the end of her tragedy. Lady Ravenwood had a daughter, whom she loved dearly. But after her land was stolen, her daughter was taken away from her and sent to live with a wealthy family in another town. Lady Ravenwood was heartbroken and desolate, forced to live in the woods behind Ravenwood Manor as a recluse for the rest of her life. Over the years, Lady Ravenwood's anger and bitterness grew, and she began to believe that the only way to find peace was to seek revenge against Emily's family. Her spirit had been trapped in the manor ever since death, unable to move on until she had avenged the wrongs done to her and her family. Suddenly, they heard a blood-curdling scream. Emily and Thomas rushed to investigate and found Lady Ravenwood's spirit materializing before them. "I have been waiting for this moment for centuries," she hissed. "Your family has caused me nothing but pain and suffering. Now it's time for your family to pay." Lady Ravenwood's ghostly figure was now fully materialized, her eyes blazing with fury. She let out a blood-curdling scream that echoed through the halls of Ravenwood Manor, sending shivers down their spines. Emily and Thomas tried to run, but the ghostly apparition was too quick for them. Lady Ravenwood pursued them relentlessly, her twisted visage contorted with anger and vengeance. They could feel her cold breath on their necks as they ran through the manor, dodging furniture and leaping over obstacles. Emily and Thomas knew they had to fight back if they wanted to survive. They looked around frantically, searching for anything that could help them. Emily grabbed a candlestick and swung it at the ghost, but it passed right through her. Thomas found an old sword and tried to strike Lady Ravenwood, but his blade simply passed through her spectral form. The vengeful spirit laughed mockingly, taunting them about their inability to fight back. Emily and Thomas realized that they were dealing with a formidable enemy, and they needed to find another way to defeat her. Suddenly, Emily remembered the diary they had found. She grabbed it and flipped through the pages frantically until she found the solution. Lady Ravenwood's daughter had been taken away from her, and she had been unable to find her ever since. Emily knew what she had to do. As Emily and Thomas stood their ground against Lady Ravenwood, Emily made a promise to find her daughter and return her land to the rightful owners. Lady Ravenwood's ghostly figure seemed to waver for a moment before she let out a guttural scream saying go, her form pulsing with an unearthly energy. But Lady Ravenwood could find no rest yet. She lingered in the manor, haunting it with her restless presence. Emily and Thomas knew they had to find her daughter and return her land to put her soul at rest. They searched for weeks, following every lead they could find, until they finally stumbled upon the truth. Lady Ravenwood's daughter was raised by another family in a neighboring town. She had never known her true heritage or the fate of her mother. Emily and Thomas traveled to the other town and met with the daughter, explaining everything to her. At first, she was hesitant to believe them, but after seeing the evidence they had gathered, she agreed to help. Together, they returned to Ravenwood Manor and presented the daughter as the rightful heir to the land that had been stolen from Lady Ravenwood's family. As soon as the deed was done, Lady Ravenwood's ghostly figure appeared before them. But this time, her face was not twisted with rage. Instead, she seemed to glow with a gentle light. Emily and Thomas watched in awe as Lady Ravenwood's ghostly figure slowly dissipated into the air, as if she was finally finding peace. They knew that their promise had been fulfilled, and that they had finally put Lady Ravenwood's spirit to rest. They left the manor, feeling lighter and more at ease than they had in weeks. As they drove away from Ravenwood, Emily and Thomas knew that they would never forget the lessons they had learned. They had witnessed the power of history and the consequences of the sins of the past. But they had also seen the power of redemption and the possibility of making things right. They knew that they had been forever changed by their encounter with Lady Ravenwood, but they were also grateful for the experience, for it had made them stronger, wiser, and more compassionate. Our next story of the night is titled The Curse of Hollow Hill. Jennifer and David arrived in Hollow Hill on Halloween night, just as the sun was dipping below the horizon. The town was nestled in a valley, surrounded by tall, foreboding hills that seemed to loom over the small houses below. As they drove through the narrow streets, they noticed that most of the houses were old and dilapidated, with broken windows and overgrown lawns. The streetlights flickered with an ominous glow, casting long shadows that seemed to reach out and grab at them as they drove by. The only sign of life was the occasional flickering of pumpkin lanterns in the windows, which only served to enhance the eerie ambience of the town. The air was thick with a sense of unease, and they felt like they were being watched by unseen eyes everywhere they went. "Are you sure we're in the right place?" David asked, looking around nervously. "This place looks like a ghost town." Jennifer smiled. "That's why it's perfect for our investigation. This town has a dark history and many legends that we can explore. We need to find out why so many people have disappeared here over the years." They decided to start their investigation by talking to the locals, and stopped at a small diner on Main Street. The diner was decorated with spiderwebs and fake bats for Halloween, but the decorations did little to lighten the oppressive atmosphere. The air was heavy with the stench of old grease and coffee, and the few customers who were present sat in silence, casting furtive glances in their direction. As Jennifer and David walked up to the counter, they noticed an old man sitting on the stool next to them. He was wearing a dirty, stained shirt and had long, greasy hair that was tied back in a ponytail. His eyes were cold and seemed to stare at them with a sense of creepiness that sent shivers down each of their spines. "What can I get for you folks?" the old man asked in a gruff voice, not taking his eyes off them. "We're looking for information about the disappearances in this town. Do you know anything about them?" Jennifer asked, trying to sound friendly. The old man's expression darkened, and he turned his gaze back to his coffee. "I don't know nothing about that," he muttered. "You should leave this place before you get into trouble." Jennifer and David exchanged a glance, both sensing that the old man knew more than he was letting on. But they knew better than to push him further. They ordered their food and sat down at a nearby table, keeping a watchful eye on the old man. As they left the diner, Jennifer and David heard whispers and murmurs coming from the patrons. They could feel the tension in the air, and they knew that something was not right in Hollow Hill. Determined to uncover the truth about the disappearances in that small town, Jennifer and David set out to explore. As they walked down the street, they couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The streets were almost empty, and the only sound was the crunching of their footsteps on the gravel. As they turned the corner, they saw a large hill at the end of the road. It was shrouded in darkness, and it seemed to loom over the town like a shadow. The trees on the hill were gnarled and twisted, and the few that had leaves left were a sickly yellow color. Jennifer and David could feel a sense of foreboding emanating from the hill, as if it were warning them to stay away. But they knew that they had to press on. They approached the base of the hill, and as they started to climb, they noticed that the air was getting colder and that the trees were becoming sparse. The ground was uneven, and they had to watch their step to avoid tripping on the roots that protruded from the ground. The silence was broken only by the rustling of leaves and the distant howling of a lone coyote. As they climbed higher, they felt like the hill was getting steeper, and they had to stop several times to catch their breath. They could feel the full weight of the hill pressing down on them, and it seemed like they were still being watched by unseen eyes. Shadows seemed to move on their own, and strange noises echoed through the night. They both felt like they were being followed, but every time they turned around, there was nothing there. As they reached the top of the hill, they saw a small cottage nestled among the trees. It was old and run down, with the shutters hanging off the windows and the roof covered in moss. The cottage seemed to be abandoned, but they just couldn't shake the feeling that they were not alone. The wind started to pick up, and they heard the creaking of the trees as they swayed back and forth in the breeze. Jennifer and David felt like they had stumbled upon something they weren't supposed to see, and the sense of danger was unsettling. They decided to explore the cottage, even though they knew it could be dangerous. They approached the door, and as they pushed it open, they were met with a musty smell that made their eyes water. The inside of the cottage was dark, and they had to use their phones as flashlights to see where they were going. Suddenly, they heard a noise behind them. They turned around, but there was nothing there. Then they saw a shadow moving on its own, and they realized that they were not alone on the hill. "Did you see that?" David whispered, his voice shaking. Jennifer nodded. "I think we need to get out of here." As they turned to leave, they saw an old woman standing at the top of the hill. She was wearing a black cloak and had a twisted, gnarled staff in her hand. She stared at them with piercing eyes and beckoned them closer. "Hello, children," she said, her voice like a cackle. "What brings you to my hill?" "We're investigating the disappearances in this town," Jennifer said, trying to sound confident. The old woman nodded. "I know all about that. I've lived in this town for many years, and I've seen many things. But beware, there are dark forces at work here, and you may not like what you find." The old woman began to laugh wildly. As they left the hill, Jennifer and David felt a chill run down their spines. They knew that they were getting closer to the truth, but they also knew that they were in grave danger. As the investigation continued, Jennifer began to have disturbing dreams. In one dream, she found herself standing in front of a dark, foreboding cabin on top of the hill. She could hear children crying and begging for help, but she couldn't find a way inside. Suddenly, a ghostly figure appeared before her. It was Alice, one of the girls who had disappeared years ago. "Please help us," Alice begged, her voice echoing in Jennifer's head. "We're trapped in the basement of this cabin. The woman in black keeps us here, and we can't escape." Jennifer woke up in a state of terror, her heart racing with fear. She knew that she had to help the children and bring the woman in black to justice. In the middle of the night, she woke up David, and they rushed out of the hotel towards the cabin on top of the hill. As they arrived at the cabin, they forced their way inside and ran towards the basement. They could hear a sinister laugh echoing through the halls, and they knew that they were getting closer. Suddenly, the old witch appeared before them, her face transforming into Alice's face as she laughed. "Oh, did Alice send for you?" The old witch cackled. Jennifer and David felt a sharp pain as they were hit with a blunt force object, and they fell to the ground. The last thing they saw before losing consciousness was the old man from the diner and the woman in black talking together. Unfortunately, Jennifer and David were never seen again. Their disappearance only added to the growing list of missing persons in Hollow Hill. The woman in black was never caught, and the town remained shrouded in darkness and fear. Rumors began to spread throughout Hollow Hill about the disappearances of Jennifer and David. Some said that they had stumbled upon the woman in black's lair and had been captured. Others believed that they had uncovered the truth about the old witch and the men who had been covering up her crimes for years, and were silenced as a result. As more and more people went missing, the rumors grew more sinister. Some claimed that the town was cursed, that the ghosts of the past were seeking revenge on the living. Others spoke of a dark cult that operated in the shadows, sacrificing innocent lives to appease their twisted desires. Despite numerous investigations by the authorities, the truth remained hidden. The people of Hollow Hill lived in fear, never knowing who would be next. The legend of the woman in black and the curse of Hollow Hill lived on, a cautionary tale to those who dared to venture into the unknown. The town had become a place of shadows and secrets, where the truth was buried deep beneath the earth and the only certainty was fear. And our final story of the night is titled The Secrets Trapped Within the Main Street Manor. Rachel and Mark had just moved into their new apartment on Main Street. They had been searching for a new home for weeks, and this apartment had seemed perfect. It was spacious, with large windows that let in plenty of light, and it was close to all the best shops and restaurants in town. But as they began to unpack their boxes and settle in, they noticed that something was off. The apartment was old and decrepit, with creaky floorboards and peeling wallpaper. It had a musty smell that Rachel couldn't seem to get rid of, no matter how much she cleaned. For her entire life, Rachel had always been sensitive to paranormal activity, and she had a feeling that they were not alone in this apartment. Mark, who was always skeptical of the supernatural, brushed off her concerns and said that it was just an old building settling in. Rachel continued to be plagued by an unshakable feeling that something was off in their new home. At first, she had dismissed it as just being nervous about moving into a new apartment. But as the days passed, the feeling grew stronger. Doors would slam shut on their own, as if someone was pushing and closed with all their might. Objects would move without any explanation, and Rachel could hear strange noises in the middle of the night that sounded like whispers and footsteps. Rachel knew that there was something wrong with the apartment, but she couldn't quite put her finger on what it was. She tried to rationalize the strange occurrences, telling herself that it was just the wind or an old building settling in. But the more she tried to deny it, the more the paranormal activity seemed to intensify. Something or someone was calling out to her for help. Rachel was now struggling to sleep through the night, her mind filled with fear and uncertainty. Every creak of the floorboards or gust of wind would make her jump, convinced that something was lurking in the shadows. She tried to talk to Mark about her concerns, but he was dismissive, telling her that she was just imagining things. But Rachel knew that it wasn't her imagination. Something was causing all of these strange occurrences, and she was determined to find out what it was. She began to research the history of the apartment building, hoping to find some clue as to why the ghosts were haunting their home. Rachel's research into the history of the apartment building led her to uncover a dark secret that had been buried for years. It turned out that the previous tenants of the apartment, a family of 4, had met a grisly end. The father was an abusive drunk, and one day he had snapped, ending his family in a drunken rage. As Rachel read more about the tragic event, she couldn't help but feel a sense of dread. She knew that the spirits of the murdered family were now haunting the apartment, seeking revenge for their untimely deaths. Rachel realized that they needed to find a way to appease the ghosts and put their souls to rest before it was too late. She shared her findings with Mark, who was now beginning to believe in the supernatural occurrences happening all around them. Together, they began to perform various rituals and experiments to try and communicate with the spirits. At first, they didn't seem to be making any progress, but then they noticed a change. The objects in the apartment stopped moving, the doors stopped slamming shut, and the eerie noises in the middle of the night ceased. Rachel and Mark breathed a sigh of relief, thinking that they had put the spirits to rest. But their relief was short-lived. One night, as they were sitting in the living room watching TV, they heard a loud banging coming from the hallway. Rachel got up to investigate, but Mark grabbed her arm, insisting that it was too dangerous. But Rachel was determined to find out what was causing the noise. She cautiously walked down the hallway, her heart pounding in her chest. With each step towards the end of the dark and narrow hallway, Rachel's heart pounded harder and faster. She could feel the hair on the back of her neck standing on end as she approached the dreaded spot. And there it was, a ghastly apparition, the figure of the father looming before her with an empty bottle tightly clenched in his hand. Rachel's entire body froze in fear, leaving her rooted to the spot. She could feel the icy grip of terror taking hold of her as the ghostly figure of the murderous father started to advance towards her. The rage in his eyes was almost too much to bear, sending a chill down her spine that made her feel as though she was trapped in a never-ending nightmare. As the ghostly father came closer, Rachel was paralyzed with fear, unable to move or even scream. She could feel the cold, spectral breath of the father on her face as he let out an otherworldly howl. Instinctively, Rachel recited a prayer for protection. The ghost of the drunken killer instantly froze in place, his anger evident in his ghostly features. But the prayer held him in place, and he couldn't move. Rachel could feel the energy in the room shifting as the father's grip on the spirits of his wife and children weakened. They were finally able to escape his hold and appeared before Rachel and Mark, quickly smiling at them before vanishing into thin air. The father, realizing he no longer had power over his family, quickly vanished into thin air as well. The couple could feel the oppressive energy release from their new apartment as the ghostly presence dissipated. Rachel and Mark breathed a sigh of relief, but they knew that the danger wasn't over yet. They had come face to face with the supernatural, and they knew that they could never forget what they had experienced. But they were also grateful for the bond that the experience had created between them. As they looked around their now peaceful apartment, they couldn't help but feel a sense of gratitude that they had been able to help the spirits move on. They knew that the apartment would always hold a special place in their hearts, as it was the place where they had faced their fears and come out on the other side stronger. And there you have it. Another spine-tingling episode of our scary stories has come to an end. We hope that you enjoyed these tales of terror and that they left you feeling suitably creeped out. Don't forget to tune in next time for more hair-raising stories from the realm of the supernatural. Until then, stay safe and keep an eye out for the shadows that lurk in the corners of your room.